So, welcome everybody to our professional development session tonight entitled The Future of Higher Education. Very pleased as the president of the MFCA to bring you this event. This event actually started with an idea that Bob Bonner, I'm not sure if he's on the call yet, but he kind of just raised it in one of our monthly happy hours in terms of how's everyone doing at their institution regarding, this COVID-19, and then what does this mean going forward? So the executive team and I just kind of briefly spoke about it, thought, okay, who will have something to share? First name popped up was none other than Dr. Miles Davis. I reached out to him, and if you know Miles, you know this was something he was thinking about probably before anyone else. Then he recommended two other panelists to join him. So we reached out to Dr. Ian Williamson as well as Dr. Rowena Ortiz Walters. All three were very ecstatic to share with the MFCA, the MDSA, as well as the other faculty alumni associations connected to the PhD project and the other doctoral student associations. So again, I welcome you all. Looking forward to this conversation. With that being said, I will turn it over to our Vice President, Dr. Carlos Miller, who will be our moderator for tonight. Carlos?
Hello and welcome. As our esteemed president mentioned, I am the vice president of the MFCA, the Management Faculty of Color Association. And we are so grateful for our members who are able to join as well as some of our guests. Before I introduce our esteemed panelists, I'd just like to cover a few ground rules. So we do not have a chat function. However, we do have a Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen for you to ask questions. You will remain muted throughout the webinar. Only our panelists will be able to be heard. The session will be recorded, so if you just want to stay engaged and you don't feel like writing notes, that's totally fine. We do have some questions that some of you submitted beforehand that we also shared with our panelists. Each panelist will have 7 minutes to give their take on the state of the union, the future of higher education from their perspective. So we are so grateful for their time and their talent and their efforts in leading the charge at their respective universities. And I'm just so excited. All right. If there are no questions before we get started, I'm going to introduce our panelists. I will begin with Dr. President Miles Davis, the 20th president of Linfield College. Dr. Davis has a PhD in Human and Organizational Sciences from the George Washington University. He also has a Master of Arts in Human Resources Development from Bowie State University and a BA in Communications from Duquesne University. Dr. Davis is the first college president to come out of the PhD project. If you have the feature to clap your hands or virtually clap your hands, let's give it up. Yes, I see some hands raising. Yes, we are virtually engaged. Great, love to see you guys doing that. Dr. Davis is currently an authority on entrepreneurship, and his most recent work focuses on integrity, values, and principles in the business world, as well as faith-based entrepreneurship. He helps organizations manage cultural and structural changes, strategic planning, leadership development, and growth initiatives. And if you're engaged in our MFCA Facebook, he also constantly updates us on what we need to be thinking about in the future of higher ed. I'm going to stop there, but I want to tell you a fun fact about Dr. Davis. Not only is he, the first president to come out of the PhD project, we've also recently learned that he's famous. I don't know if he has an IMDb profile, but if you have some time to Netflix and chill tonight, you can go check him out in the movie Santa Girl on Netflix.
Picking up the Tooth Fairy, yeah.
He's a tooth fairy. I would say another interesting fact that I know about Dr. Davis is that he's also the lead pastor of the Stock Ministry.
There you go.
I just threw that in there. If you want to know what I'm talking about, feel free to follow him on Instagram. All right, next, I'm going to introduce Dr. Ian Williamson. Dr. Williamson is the Pro Vice Chancellor and the Dean of the Wellington School of Business and Government at Victoria University of Wellington in New Zealand. Prior to joining Victoria University of Wellington, he served on the faculties of the Melbourne Business School in Australia, Rutgers Business School in the US, the Zurich Institute of Business Education in Switzerland, the Robert H. Smith School of Business at the University of Maryland, and the Institute, I can't pronounce that.
Technology, that's fine.
Oh, it's like technology, but okay.
Just a little different spelling.
Right, and that second word, Bandung?
Bandung.
Bandung, in Indonesia. So yeah, he's traveled a bit. He received his PhD from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and has also been extremely engaged in helping to advance the careers and the lives of our PhD project members, our MDSA members, and was the founding member, correct? The founding member of the Management Faculty of Color Association. Ian's passion is helping more people gain access to a world-class education, and such as research focuses on understanding how to positively impact the talent pipelines of communities and organizations. He studied these issues in a wide range of settings, ranging from European Fortune 500 firms to Indonesian SMEs to USA ethnic minority communities to Australian indigenous business. His research has received several international awards and has been covered by media outlets across the world. So we are so delighted to have him. I do have a couple of interesting facts about Dr. Williamson. He is also famous in Indonesia. He's had a feature role.
Only there, nowhere else.
He's worldwide famous. But he was in a feature role. He had a feature role in a film in Indonesia. And if he shares that movie with us, we can go look it up and check him out. Put some subtitles on for those of us who need it. Another interesting fact is that I named my son Ian after Dr. Williamson. That's how much he touched my life when I was a first-year doctoral student.
Does your husband know about this? Oh,
No, I tell him something else.
okay.
That Ian means God is gracious, and we needed grace at that time. All right. Last but most certainly not least, we have Dr. Rowena Ortiz Walters. She has served as the Dean of the School of Business and Economics and Professor of Management at the State University of New York, Plattsburgh. Did I say it's Plattsburgh, right? All right. Formerly, she was Professor and Department Chair of Management at, y'all, spelling is not my friend today.
Quinnipiac University.
Thank you so much. Her goals are to enhance the status of all women in the workplace and foster the development of more women leaders. Unapologetic, I appreciate you. Her research expertise and interests include mentoring for women and minorities in the workplace, the scholarship of teaching and learning, Latino entrepreneurship, and creativity. She earned her doctorate from the University of Connecticut. Interesting fact about Dr. Ortiz Walters is that she has a stay-at-home husband who homeschools their 3 children and could have given many of us some tips of how to thrive in the quarantine with our kids. All right, so enough from me. I'm now going to turn it over to our panelists, beginning with Dr. Davis, and they will give their 7-minute spiel on what's going on with the state of higher education today.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, I have to acknowledge how glad I am to see all of you that I can see, and to know that so many of you are here. It gets kind of lonely for me in Oregon, and at my institution there is not a single person that looks like me. And so I just want to encourage you to keep on doing what you're doing wherever you are and making the difference that you're doing. So with that, I want to jump into this. I see a lot changing in higher education. And one of the things that I see changing in higher education, and quite frankly, I'm pushing for this change, so I have an agenda here, is to realize that higher education is more than education. That what we do is provide social services to a lot of our students. For a good number of our students, whether they're at private institutions or public institutions, we are their only source of medical care. We're their only source of mental health. We're the only place where they can get 3 meals a day. We're the only source in which they have their own bed to sleep in. This is what's changing. As we talk about the new majority coming into higher education, we have to realize that what we do is far more than educate. So while people talk about the need for online education, and as Rowena's husband, I'm sure, would testify, what happens in a school or any place of education is the socialization that is necessary. And if people who look like us are left out of that process, we will fail to develop the skills that will allow us to be successful within the corporate world. So it is necessary for us to be a part of higher education. I want to touch on what is happening within the shifts at the strategic level with universities. For the first time, you'll see, I'm seeing, and I say this from the perspective, I sit on the board of the National Association of Independent Colleges and University. I also sit on the board of the Oregon Alliance of Independent Colleges and University. There has never been so much collaboration among private colleges and universities to do things that once might have been dispersed, that once everybody thought they had to do by themselves. And I'll give an example, even as the news was made yesterday. One of the issues that is impacting all of higher education is Title IX. And so at once upon a time, you might have had your own Title IX person do it. It makes sense that if the law is changing, and this is a law, then let's engage in collaboration, bringing the best person possible, pay them, as opposed to individuals doing this. I also see this happening on the curriculum model. And so the ideal that everybody has to do everything individually when there are 10 institutions within a 5-mile radius makes no sense. And so what I see is more partnerships being formed where you can do part of your time here at my institution, then I'll go to your institution, will serve that purpose also, which will be an important thing to feature. This will also have very interesting impact upon the nature of the faculty role and where it is that you're attached to, what it is that you do, how your career forward. I think that people are coming to grips with understanding the exact nature of their institution. And so there is a very different path for you if you are at a Research 1 in defining this mission, if you are at a Research 2, if you are at a master's level comprehensive, if you're at a bachelor's level institution, your path will be defined more by where you choose to affiliate. And so what becomes important for one institution may not be as important to another institution. And that is critical, particularly for the MDSA students who are here. You have to make a decision about where you want to play. And because the institutions have to embrace their identity. And there's been much hoopla in the press about everything's gonna be a mega university. In the words of an old group that I used to listen to, don't believe the hype. Because some of you may remember what was said about MOOCs and how that was going to take over the world, massive online programs. It didn't work because remember what I started out from, which is that the students that come to our institutions are coming for more than just an education. They're coming for socialization. And so the ideal that there are going to be 10,000 people online, or quite frankly, that every student can survive in an environment where there are 300, 400, 500 people in the class, it's just not consistent with the data in which we're seeing. And the choice that we offer in higher education, just like it's important for faculty members or potential faculty members to choose where they're going, is also important for students to have the option about where they can go and consider that. I would offer a bit of advice before stopping short of my time to cede it to those wiser than I am, is that you need to understand what your worth and your contribution is. And so a lot of us have been taught, and this will probably be the most controversial thing that I say tonight, and there may be people disagree with me. A lot of us have been taught that the most important thing that we have to do once we become a professor is keep quiet, keep our head down as we seek tenure. I will tell you that the idea that this is a sustainable model is being challenged. The ideal is it is the value that you bring to the organization. And organizations that face financial crisis, just posted about the University of Alaska, you look at what's happening in New Mexico, you look at what's happening in Wisconsin, is the value that you bring. And the value that you bring is the interaction that you have with the students in the institution. And so unless, again, like I said, you have to choose your path. If you are planning to be a scholar in a research one institution, then your research becomes primacy, that becomes your currency. However, there are other things that are just as important, that are important to institutions, and it's your willingness to engage. And I want you never to forget that please do not wait 6 or 7 years to use your voice, because the institution needs your voice now more than ever. I cannot tell you how many institutions I've gotten calls from, because I'm just going to say the one thing. I can't cover it up, and I realize this is being recorded, so I try to say this. But the reality of it is that there are not a lot of institutions that have leadership that look like me. I'll put it like that. And in this moment, they are befuddled about how to respond to the circumstances. They are confused. They need your voice. So as the demographics as this country are changing, they need to hear from people like you how you can help them shift, because that is what is happening. For those of you, and the final thing I'll say is, for those of you who are on search committees, be aware of the unconscious bias about who's being kept out of your institutions because they didn't attend the right place. And then you might want to have a conversation with your search chair or your dean or whatever about what the institution needs, because this is what's happening right now as I'm recruiting for deans. You can't send me a set of candidates if there are no Black or brown candidates included, because our population is shifting. And so what you're doing is important to the future of higher education, because higher education is shifting as they bring in more of the new majority. And I'm sure you're seeing that in your institution. If you're not, I'm surprised. It's Blacker, it's browner, it's more female, and it's more Pell students that are coming into those institutions. And they need people who can serve as natural mentors, and they need leadership also. So if you're already a professor, you're thinking about your next move, you might want to think in moving into a different position so that you can make decisions about policies that will make sure that your institution reflects what is going on in the larger scheme of things. And I'll stop now and allow for questions to be asked later on. Did I go into time, Carlos? Am I good?
You did great. You did great. You said 1 minute over. No, I'm just kidding. You did great. You know, so I know you touched me with some of the things that you said. You know, I have no hesitation to ask questions, but I do see that someone has requested that we have a chat box, and that's just not an option right now, Dr. Hood, but feel free to post your question in the Q&A portion at the end, and we'll answer that live, or we'll ask our panelists to type an answer for you. We do have one anonymous question that asks, what do you think about doing interdisciplinary work as part of your path? So I don't know if they mean that as part of you, Dr. Miles, your path, or you in general, like how we should be thinking about interdisciplinary work.
Well, see, and again, I want to remind you, it all depends on your institution. Mm-hmm. You know, what does your institution think about it? So, and I'm not going to speak for my brother who I love dearly, Dr. Ian, but I remember, and I hope that Ian doesn't mind me quoting him, but when Ian made a decision, Ian is an incredible scholar. And when he was at the University of Maryland and he made the decision to move out of the University of Maryland, Brother Ian said to me, I don't want to publish. I didn't join academia to publish in 3 journals. You remember that conversation, Brother Ian?
Definitely.
And so what I'm saying is you have to know where you're going. Like my institution, we do interdisciplinary work because we're rooted within the liberal arts. Now, so it all depends on what the structure is and the path that you're seeing. And so whether you do good or, you know, people think one is good or one is bad, it all depends. It has to be consistent with what you're looking for. So when I'm looking to hire faculty, I look for faculty members that are interdisciplinary. Why? Because I can use them in multiple areas. And we're not doing what University of Maryland did, or UT Austin has the UT Austin 25. It all depends on what type of institution you're going to. And so you need to, I'm glad that you're asking that question now, and I hope that came from a doctoral student, because if you know what you want to do, then the value of your PhD is that you can align your interests with the type of institution that would recognize that. There are over 1,000, and you know, off the top of my head, there are 1,144, give or take a couple of dozen, private institutions. There are 236 Research One institutions, and then there's a whole bunch of stuff in between, and not counting the stuff, and this is within the US, not counting what others have done and going to internationally. And so you need to know what you want to do and then align that. Don't let this job work you. Work the job to do what you want to do. Don't let somebody tell you what you have to do. You can do any doggone thing you want to. You just have to find an institution that's compatible with what you're doing.
Thank you. I will take one more question. We'll quickly move to Dr. Ian Williamson. There was a question posted in the Q&A, and I had a question similar: what to do when the dean does not see diversifying the faculty as a worthy objective? And I will add on to that, when you mentioned, you know, if we are on search committees, to be aware of unconscious bias. I'll even say, what about conscious bias? Like when it's not even hidden. So, and if you could answer that in 30 seconds or less.
So the 30-second answer is, remember what I said. So we all have a different life circumstances. I don't know why you would stay at an institution that doesn't value the same things that you value. It's your PhD. Now, having said that, I understand that people have different life circumstances. And so you have to try to work the system to try to raise that level of consciousness about what it is. Again, I'm just going to emphasize this. You have a PhD. You have options, maybe not as many options as you had, you know, last year, but this will all change and it'll come back. You have options, and decide how to work that and provide recommendations and impact the system. I think that's 30 seconds. I think that's all that I was given, so I'll stop.
Yes, thank you so much for that. Virtual hand claps. Y'all let's see them, the claps, the thumbs up, whatever, raise hands. There you go. That's like a high five. Okay. And we're going to move on to Dr. Ian Williamson. I will pass the virtual mic.
Sounds good. Thank you very much. Let me just start off by thanking the executive committee for organizing this. Just, you know, it's amazing to see how the Managing Faculty of Color Association has just expanded and going on to greater places. So just the idea that we can come together in this way, in a virtual way, certainly when we started this in 2001, was definitely not on our radar. And so it's just really nice to see the organization has evolved to meet the needs of everyone as our technology, as our membership has evolved. So I'll jump right into some things that I think are critical and think about the future. I'll build on something that Miles talked about, in that the role of the business school. And I'll kind of frame this. Miles, I think, did a good job of talking about higher education from the president's lens, because that's the lens he has, maybe from the institution lens. I'll try to focus more specifically on the business school as an institution. And certainly this affirming our legitimacy and our social standing is a critical thing. And I think that's really critical now. So as we're dealing with economic crisis, as we're dealing with social crisis, a lot of people are going to look and ask, what is the role of the business school in this situation? Are we the solution? Are we the problem? Have we contributed? And we saw the similar conversation that came about in 2007, 2008 during the global financial crisis, a similar conversation that happened in 2001 when we were dealing with the dot-com crisis. So as we're dealing with this economic environment that we're going to be facing for the next several years, there's going to be a question asked in society around, what is the role of a business school? What should we be doing? And I think as academics, we need to be aware of that, because ultimately that is questioning the legitimacy of our profession. And if we're not engaged with those issues, so this question around what if your dean doesn't want to think about diversification? I mean, in essence, not dealing with this issue means you are no longer relevant to the community you serve. And it's not the arts and sciences that have to answer that question. It's not this you know, it's the business school that will have to be front and center in answering that question, and sort of having a lens to think about the economic overlay between the social issues we're facing. And as academics, you know, we have a voice on that. I think if you're absent from that conversation, people are going to say, why are we funding you? Why would I send my kids to study with you? You will not be seen as attractive. So the second thing that I would say, and I think it relates to that point, is this issue around how we interface with industry. I'm someone who is a firm believer that we are a professional school. We should embrace that. And I think that's something that oftentimes business schools struggle with on campuses. Oftentimes they see themselves as trying to compare to sciences or arts and the arts and humanities. And there's a history of business school, which was about trying to legitimate ourselves through our research, following a model that was set up by the sciences and arts and humanities. The reality is we're professional schools, and that is our distinct advantage. And in fact, one of the things that why most universities want to have a business school, because we allow them a chance to engage with that sector, which is very valuable and very important. But if we're professional schools, we have to behave like one. And the current situation around economic challenges created by COVID, social issues created by the racial protests that we're facing, not just in the US. I should share that I went to a rally across the street in front of the Parliament House in New Zealand with over 2,000 people 2 weeks ago. And this past weekend, we had another rally with 20,000 people all shouting out Black Lives Matter. And at the one I went to, I was the only Black life. And so I would point out that this issue that's happening in America is a global one, and it is causing people to rethink what's going on in their society. And I think it's unveiling a lot of the economic and social challenges and injustices that are present in a bunch of different societies. So like in many ways, Black culture has often been one of those things that is led around the world. We're doing that again this time as well. And so I think people should really appreciate that. So as a business school, then we need to be engaging with businesses. And one of the things that we've been doing here is spending a lot of time looking at how can we fund really groundbreaking research. And we have a program here called Partnership Chairs, where I, as a dean, I go out, I meet with different organizations, and we talk about what are some of the key broad issues that we think society is going to be facing. So for us, it's been things around the use of digital technology in society, digital inclusion, issues around economic disasters, environmental disasters and the economic impact associated with that, ethical leadership, issues associated with how governments actually manage their finances more broadly. And what we've done is we've pulled together collections, and we said we're going to assign an academic or two to study this particular area. And these partners provide external funding to pay for the salaries of the academics. So it's not common for business schools to get NSF funding or NIA funding or other sources of funding. How will we fund this groundbreaking research is a critical thing that every business school is having to think about. We will do that by really embracing the fact that we're professional schools and liaisoning with these organizations and creating really interesting approaches. We recently created a new, changed our accounting program so that we co-teach our accounting program with the accounting body in New Zealand. Right, so that's deeply embedded within that. So I think that interface within industry is one of the ways in which you can reaffirm your legitimacy and social standing as a business school. And then finally, and this perhaps acts as a nice bridge to Rowena's session, which is, you know, that requires different skill sets from our academics, right? So it's not just about doing high quality academic research. It's also about how can you engage with industry? How can you engage with other sectors, civil society, as well as government? Those liaison skills, I think, are quite critical. And many of us in this group are coming from backgrounds where you have professional experiences and you've come into your academic environment and basically nobody asks you about those experiences ever again. You're never sort of given the opportunity to use them. And what I think the future of business education looks like, those individuals that are very comfortable in the classroom, in a boardroom, in a community gathering, those are going to be the academics that I'm going to put a lot of attention towards, because they're going to help me answer this broader question as to why should you support us? Why should you send your kids to us? Why is what we're doing relevant to the problems you're facing in society? And also, where is the next great idea going to come from? And that also carries with it this ability for people to have a comfort with pedagogical breath. and being able to engage and co-teach with industry partners, not just teach a class by yourself. So those three things around this question around legitimacy, really embracing the fact that we are a professional entity and how we engage with industry, and then developing a workforce and developing faculty members who are comfortable with that liaison role. I think that's the future, certainly over the next 3 to 5 years, and that will be where I think tremendous opportunities exist.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. We did have a question that came from the chat that's not visible there anymore, but it came from Dr. Kim Ellis. She said, are there any general actions beyond recruiting initiatives that universities should take, regardless of their emphasis or mission, to facilitate a shift? If all of us recommended these actions at our respective institutions, our collective impact would be much greater.
Well, I'll talk about some of the, so the context here is we have a very large, our minority population would be the indigenous population, the Maori population, and then we have a very large Pacifica population. So these are individuals who've moved here from Samoa, Cook Islands, Papua New Guinea, and the like. And they're highly underrepresented in higher education. They're young, they're the fastest growing population of potential college students, and they tend to have lower social economic outcomes. So this is a big issue for the country.
Mm-hmm.
When I arrived, we had very low numbers, we had very little staff, and so obviously made a big emphasis on hiring more staff and the like, but appreciating that it isn't just about getting the number of staff, it's about capability. So when I talked to my staff, I said, well, we're going to create some programs that we're going to use to target meeting the needs in those communities. So one, we're going to have to go talk to them, right? As opposed to sort of coming up with a program and then go into the community and trying to pitch it. That's horrible, right? Nobody ever wants that. Co-create with them. And then we're going to co-deliver with them. And it changed our funding structure. So we actually had a philanthropic trust that put a Maori Philanthropic Trust that put up money to pay for us to go provide courses, delivery for up and coming Maori leaders. And of course, those individuals are not in Wellington. They're spread across the country. And so we actually had to go deliver these programs across New Zealand. They paid for it, right? Now, previously, we had tried to run a master's program. We called it a Masters of Maori Business. It was a complete failure. We had 0 students who enrolled in this program after a year and a half of planning to actually set it up. But when we actually changed the model and co-created this with community, which made it seem as if we were actually giving them what they wanted, not only did we have students, they paid for it. It was profitable for us, right? And so again, that liaison role, that understanding of how we connect and sort of being very forthright with that question of, why should you deal with us? We need to be able to see yourselves as being legitimate for you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Williamson. Of course, I have another question, but I'm going to move on to Dr. Rowena Ortiz Walters. Okay, just make sure when I see the thumbs up, I know I did good. I did right. Okay, I'm going to move on to her. If everyone can please just show some love to Dr. Williamson. We just want to say thank you for answering our questions, sharing your unique perspective, because we do need to know what's going on internationally and how what happens in the U.S. impacts those abroad, and how what's happening abroad impacts the U.S. as well. So thank you so much for that. And Dr. Ortiz Walters, take it away. I'm passing the virtual mic.
Thank you. So I apologize, my computer is acting very funny and everything is jumping, so it looks very bizarre right now, but I can't get the other computer working. So here's technology, right? Gotta love it. So I actually wanted to talk a little bit about, a little bit at a more local level, sort of a micro level perspective of kind of what I see happening, particularly as dean. I think I'm very in tune with seeing the day-to-day operations of the faculty and still being very supportive of the faculty as their advocate, because that's your role as a dean. And so from my perspective, I would say there's sort of 3 areas that I see changing as a result of COVID-19. One is really that the teaching and learning in the new normal environment. That's going to really present some major challenges. I just want to read a couple things that I saw. There's a great article, and I'll actually share the link with folks later. Perhaps I'll send it to the e-board and then they can share it back out to the group. But there was an interesting article that talked about the day in the life of a faculty member during the new normal. And it was quite different. And it had things in it like, you know, students may not all properly be wearing their masks. Hand sanitizing dispensers run out quickly due to demand. Insufficient space in the office to maintain 6 feet of distance with students. Teaching the same material multiple times a week due to smaller sized classes. Teaching 5 days a week, thereby increasing faculty workloads. Classroom outfitted with multiple cameras and microphones and no sense of privacy. Some classes with plexiglass, some not due to a supply shortage. Hoarse voice due to yelling necessitated by the wearing of masks. Got their books and now can't borrow each other's. Recording lectures to teach online at the last minute because of insufficient classroom space. That's the reality that most of us are going to experience when we come back in the fall, if we come back in the fall. If your institution is thinking about doing a hybrid modality, because that's probably the most likely scenario, you're going to have to think as faculty and doctoral students, if you're teaching, how do you mentally prepare for what that's going to look like? What does it mean to be teaching in a socially distanced, face-covered teaching and learning environment? You know, so can you do a walkthrough at your institution? Could you check out your classroom, see what it would look like as a socially distanced space? Try putting on a mask and talking in the classroom, or try lecturing and see what that's going to feel like. And just so you know, there's also a corollary to the article on a day in the life of the faculty. It's a day in the life of the student learning in the new normal environment. And I'll send that link as well. And I think that that's going to be instructive for faculty to think about, what does this feel like for students? I'm upset, I'm anxious, I'm tired. What does it mean for my student on the other end? Because as Miles talked about, and I'm sorry, Ian, because I didn't get to hear what you said as my computer was going crazy, but we are here to provide multiple levels of services to our students nowadays, not just the education. So we really need to take that into account. The other thing I'll note under this new teaching and learning environment is that we do know that the data is showing that the health of Black individuals is disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. So I would say to just keep reading and continuously learning about the virus and how to keep yourself safe and your students safe, and to certainly use your voice, as Smile talked about, and ask for reasonable accommodations if you feel you need it. And the other thing, which, you know, it's a little bit of perhaps bad news, but I'm also trying to just share what I know, what I see, so that you can sort of start to prepare yourself, is I think colleges are going to be relying on graduate students a lot more to teach in person, because they tend to be younger and they tend to have less underlying health conditions. So I think those are things to know. The other trend I see that's related actually to number one, but is different, is teaching in different modalities simultaneously. And so by that, I'm talking about that high flex model that some of you may be hearing at your colleges and institutions. And that's really a way of teaching where you're in the classroom, you are face-to-face with some students, and you're synchronously online with other students, but the students get to decide which modality they will attend, as well as when they will attend it. So just because I started out fully online one week doesn't mean I have to continue that way. Or if I was fully face-to-face doesn't mean I will continue that way. I honestly think that we're going to see greater popularity and faster rates of adoption for the high flex models as we move forward, because I think what it will do is it will support colleges and universities whenever they're going through any kind of crisis. And I will second what Miles said. I think the leadership is really scrambling to figure out how to do this. I know you don't want to hear that, but I think that that's really the case. So what I would say is really focus, because of this high flex model, really focus on upskilling, because we all understand that faculty of color and women tend to get evaluated less favorably in their teaching than non-faculty of color. And so I think that COVID-19 is going to exacerbate the struggles that students are experiencing. And unfortunately, I don't think that they're going to be able to differentiate between the quality of the course and the quality of you as an instructor. So I think you definitely want to be thinking about that. I think a lot of institutions are going to be doing some resource allocation toward their center of teaching excellence to make sure that faculty are well versed in teaching in these different models. And I would say, as a faculty of color, as a doctoral student of color who might teach, to make sure that you do utilize this resource and actually that you document your involvement with them. Have them provide you the documentation. And I'm talking through the perspective of, if you're putting, at some point you will put your dossier together for tenure or promotion, and you want to be documenting this involvement because it is important. Students of color also tend to have a lower sense of belonging in higher education institutions, and I'm very concerned about this remote form of teaching and how that's going to exacerbate feelings of loneliness and isolation for our students, particularly if they're first-generation college students. We're also hearing data about the digital divide. So, students of color may not necessarily have the technology at home. I think these things, the digital divide and the remote teaching and learning, is really going to combine to impact the success of students of color. And so how do we, as institutions, as faculty, as administrators, as leaders, ensure that our students remain on track to graduate and be successful, both undergraduate and graduate students? Who's going to be checking in on them? And I can say that quite likely the folks that are going to be doing that checking is going to be the faculty of color. And so that ties into my third sort of change that I see occurring, and that's different emphases and placed on faculty performance evaluation. So we all know the concept of cultural taxation, right? So I think that that's only going to exacerbate due to COVID-19 as students of color, both undergraduate and graduate, reach back to faculty of color for support. So I think as institutions, and hopefully, these are the conversations that might be occurring or will be occurring, hopefully, for Miles, as he diversifies his faculty, certainly Ian's faculty who are more diverse, and particularly as he heads to UC Irvine. Institutional discussions need to be had about how do we make service activities associated with cultural taxation matter toward tenure. So all of the mentoring we do for students of color, or all of the multiple service activities and committees that we do to be the diversity representative, how do we make sure that that counts toward tenure in a very formal way, not just talking about it, not just lip service. The other thing I'll say is that with regard to the legitimacy of higher education, we're going to continue to see colleges and universities face pressure to define what value they bring to their community. And I think that that's how we're going to see research mattering more and more. So performance evaluations are actually going to not just be thinking about general scholarship requirements as we know them now in terms of number of publications or citation counts, but I think also thinking about a measure of faculty scholarship impact. So right now, think about, are folks doing scholarship that addresses minority-owned businesses and how they might be able to weather the economic downturn of COVID-19? Are we looking at scholarship that addresses HR practices for remote working and making sure faculty and students are still able to be productive? And by students, I mean doctoral students who are employees of the university. If we start thinking about impactful scholarship within the community, I think we're going to really need to figure out ways to protect faculty of color scholarship productivity, because that's going to require more engagement on your time in the community. And I would even go further to say, because of where I am in Plattsburgh, New York, it's not very diverse in terms of the community. I think we're going to have to find ways and strategize as to how to open doors for faculty of color to gain access to local businesses to conduct that research. The other thing I'll say is, and this kind of came up a little bit before, is as we are experiencing intense competition, we are going to see colleges needing to differentiate with their educational products. So that cross-disciplinary notion that we talked about before, developing 21st century skill sets for students, such as technology proficiency, or even the ability to work in remote teams as we're doing right now. That's all going to become important So that's going to require changes in the curriculum. That's going to require development of new programs. So from my perspective, I think the assessment of teaching is going to become more nuanced. So it isn't just going to be your peer evaluating you. It's not just going to be the student evaluations. I think we're going to start to see things such as innovativeness in teaching become a much more real thing. And also faculty held to higher standards with regard to providing evidence that student learning objectives are being met. And the last thing I'll just say is that whether your institution requires it or not, I really think that we all, and I include myself in this, should be thinking about upskilling our teaching and research and leadership competencies. I don't know if Ian talked about this because I was off the computer, but there are going to be fewer and limited tenure track positions as we move forward, unfortunately. That's the reality of the budget situations we face, the demands from the external environment. You know, people don't understand the value of higher ed. They don't understand tenure. So those positions are going to be fewer and far between. And so I think really, you know, thinking about things like, you know, we're learning to work with instructional technologists and designers and learning how to use different learning management systems so that you become more competitive in the marketplace. And unfortunately, all of this is going to come on our dime because there's going to be fewer dollars as institutions are experiencing budget constraints. And so a lot of this professional development is going to be more self-funded or outside funded. And you can think about, you know, if you teach in the summer, you know, could you start thinking about saving some of the money that you earn from that to develop a professional development fund, making sure you attend more of these free virtual professional development sessions like we're holding right now, reaching out to your union if your faculty is unionized to see if there's grants for professional development. And then certainly trying to reach out to your Office of Sponsored Research to see if there's grants for doing scholarship, specifically in this area of how do you develop faculty of color with regard to research and teaching competencies post-COVID-19. So I will stop there, and those are some of my thoughts. I was trying to really bring the perspective of what does this feel like right now? But certainly I agree with the concepts that Miles and Ian talked about with regard to some of the more macro level changes that we're seeing.
And so thank you so much for that. Let's do our virtual high five, hands up, yay. And you know, such very real things that we need to think about. Since we do have the MDSA on the call with us as well, with some of the things that you were saying, you know, as we're thinking about, you know, university dollars dwindling, not as many tenure track opportunities, what suggestions would you have for those PhD students on what they can do to make sure when they're going up on the market, whether it be this year or next year, that they can be competitive?
Well, I mean, I'll just jump in real quick. So one of the things that's interesting, so we're in the Southern Hemisphere. Our school system, we started our first term, what would typically be seen as the fall term in the US. We started that in February. So COVID hit us. Our first case of COVID in the country hit in February 28th. We were in lockdown as a country, not even 20 days later. So we experienced COVID in the meat of our primary delivery, right? So one of the advantages that the Northern Hemisphere schools have had is COVID hit you pretty much when you were going into spring break and it was kind of wrapping up. So think about the implications. So we had a bunch of students who withdrew. We had a bunch of students who've not come back. We had students leave the dorm. So the financial hit happened for us already. It's going to happen to the North American schools. You haven't had it yet because you collected all your tuition last September. We were in the process of collecting our tuition. We told the students they had to go home for fear of them catching the virus. So a lot of the things that Rowena talked about, we actually had to do, right? We had to, so I think I agree 100% in what she's predicting because it's exactly what we experienced here. And what we're seeing around that as it pertains to staffing, and of course, all the various hiring implications around that, just to kind of go back to Carlos, your specific question, you're probably going to see a lot of short-term jobs, fixed-term employment opportunities, specifically focusing on target areas. And so being able to say, like, for example, you're in management, that's great. but understanding that each of these institutions is going to have a specific lens that they're trying to take because they're trying to differentiate. Go that extra step to bleed into that description of what you're doing with your research. What was your professional background before you became a doctoral student? What particular industries or sectors are you going to focus on? Because that will allow you, I think, to be much more attractive for those roles. Because in my position, when I'm hiring now, we're hiring for specific needs more so than just generic needs. And going forward, we're going to have the ability to sort of have specific courses that we highlight, which help us differentiate out from the pack. So I just would reinforce what she's saying, because that's definitely been our experience. And I think what we've seen is what's going to happen in the US in the next several months. And that's just some thoughts on how to differentiate in the marketplace.
And the other thing I would add really quickly is, as I'm a very practical, hands-on type person, and so I'm seeing this now with regard to our own graduate assistantships. So one of the things I would say to the MDSA students is to make sure you go back to your institutions and to your faculty and to your advisors and to check in on your assistantships, because the budget situation is changing and it's very fluid. We had a scenario where for a moment there, all hiring was frozen, and that included student employment. So our master's students that had earned graduate assistantships did not have them for a short time. We were able to make the case that it's a really important recruitment tool in terms of enrollments. So obviously there's the dollar for the institution, but I would definitely encourage students to go back and just make sure that funding is available.
Yes, thank you for that.
One word of advice. I'm sure most of you have an accountant or not that you're working with. In Dr. Rowena mentioned this, you mentioned practical. Your activities related to your field that you do as part of development are tax deductible. So it reduces your tax base. Also, just as a bit of practical advice on how to handle that. If you have to self-fund, make sure that you get the receipts and document what you're doing so that you can, when you file your taxes, you might be able to recoup some of that money.
And I would say for anyone who's also on the market currently, we take it for granted, but you can see technology right now. You're all like shifting up and down for me. I'm trying to focus on one point. And so you can't take this stuff for granted. So I would say if you are on the market and you are going to have to be interviewing in this format, make sure to really be reaching out to colleagues and practicing what it would be like to Zoom interview, because you want to get the lighting right, you want to get the technology tested, although I thought I had my technology tested. You want to make sure your voice sounds well. I mean, these are all things that, make sure that the background, there's nothing crazy, around there. And I mean, we are all human. I think people are being a little bit more understanding. And I think that's one of the nice things about the whole remote working, is that people are you're kind of inviting people into your homes and they can see you're more human. But still, at the end of the day, an interview is an interview, and you want to make sure you're coming off absolutely professional and hitting the marks where you need to hit them.
I just saw there's a question about just leveraging this point around professional experiences and how do people go about being more entrepreneurial within their bounds of faculty work. I'll kind of build a little bit more on the experiences we have with this partnership chair. So I've had several academics come and say, I think there's an opportunity out here. I was having a conversation with an organization. I want to talk to you about it, right? And so it's interesting. You can tell the difference, right? There's faculty who think the dean's job is to find them money. And there's faculties who thinks the job is for them to use the dean to help them get some money, right? And so there's this thing around, I think of it as sort of like, who's going to be proactive and help me go out and till this field, and who's waiting for me to go till it so I can put some food on the table. And let me just tell you, that latter group that's waiting, they're going to be waiting for a while, right? Because that's just not the environment that we're in. And we've had several academics who've come to me and said, I have an idea, and I don't expect them to have it all thought through. That's where we get the resources to help them. But they've said, because I had an industry experience, because I had a past experience in something, for example, in shipping, it just so happened that, where we are, the major dock is very close to our building. They're doing some major work. We had a person that had some expertise and some experience in that. And they said, well, you know, I saw a newspaper article that they're making some investments in the docking area. Would it make sense for us to go have a conversation with the CEO? Right. And I think this other point that was raised around how do you manage these competing expectations that are being placed upon you? With the course, the answer for me is more integration, right? So research what you teach what you engage around, and you're going to have the ability to get multiple hits. And so I think this is becoming much more normative in how we're evaluating our academics here. So we have a leadership and an engagement category as part of our promotion process. When I first got here, that was relatively new. More and more now, that's becoming much more central. Certainly as you begin to move up the ranks into associate professor, it's critical. Nobody's getting promoted to professor if you can't show some ability to show leadership and engagement. Not either, both, right? Because I'm gonna pay you a lot of money, and I need you to be a figurehead for my institution.
What I wanted to piggyback on, can folks hear me?
Mhm.
Yeah, okay. I just wanted to piggyback on an important point Miles made with regard to the type of institution. Again, so I'm assuming that we have a cross-section of institutions represented in terms of our participants. And so while scholarship is important, think about also the kind of scholarship. So for example, I just hired someone and I was super excited because she's doing scholarship of teaching and learning, and she's looking at first generation students and how to help them be successful and what are the things that they need. To me, that resonates, that helps my student body. That kind of research matters to me. So I think you have to also be thinking about the different kinds of scholarship that are out there and what's going to be important to the particular institution that you're trying to get into.
Just to back up that point, I just hired a woman to become a chair in restorative justice. Why did we do that? Because we spoke with the Department of Justice for the government here, the police, as well as corrections, the Department of Corrections, and they were very concerned about the high rates of Maori incarceration and the challenges that's placing. We're a business school. You would not normally think of a business school as being restorative justice, but we hired someone which had a criminology background. We put them in the business school because we framed it around the economic impact of crime and recidivism in community, and they're paying for that role, right? And so, you know, that's how the entrepreneurial aspect plays out, and it's going to be a fantastic opportunity for us as a business school to have that available, and that was how we were able to find a position for that particular person.
So we do, you know, we want to be respectful of your time. We have about 3 minutes left. The amazing Dr. DT has posted a question that I'm also curious about. Do you also think that professors will be expected to raise funding to offset their salaries or contribute to the university's budget?
So let me take a first crack at that and then go on. So I will tell you that the reason that I wound up as president is because as a professor, I acted like an entrepreneur. I launched programs, I started programs, I found funding for programs. Those are key skills as you move into different levels of the organization. I don't know whether that'll be supporting your salary, but I tell you what, the only job security you have is the value in which you bring to your organization. So if you're able to go out and do something that brings in dollars, that is key. Matter of fact, I would tell you that if you're in a business school and you haven't had someone do the assessment of the economic impact of your institution on the town, you're already underwater. You need to be able to make that case because you also need to make your case in order to get dollars about why they need to support you. Because if you go under, like for instance, where I am in McMinnville, Oregon, we're the only institution there, a town of 36,000 people. Our graduation fills up the hotels, fills up the seats in the restaurants. We bring in people. Mr. Winecountry, you need to understand that economic impact and bring in those dollars for you to have security and for you to have freedom. And I'll let my co-presenters take a bite of that apple.
Yeah, I'll give you another good example. So I have a professor and I have an individual at the professor level and I have an assistant professor. They are working with us to help develop our work in entrepreneurship and innovation. We approached the Wellington is the city where I am. We approached the Wellington Economic Development Council. So they're in charge of trying to think about how to grow the economy here. One of the big drivers is how can we increase the economic outcomes for the Maori community? They wanted to develop a strategy around that. We said, well, why don't we do that for you? They put out a bid for the work. We competed against some of the consulting firms, and my 2 academics did the work. Now that's great, right? That gives us money. What do they use the money for? They hire some research fellows because, of course, if we write the economic development plan for the city, how are we going to evaluate the economic development plan? Well, we're going to get the data, right? And so now they've basically figured out a way to fund their research activity. And so again, this is embracing the fact that we're a professional entity. We can kind of go have these conversations and be seen as legitimate versus other parts of the university, which, you know, if the arts and science showed up to Wellington Region Economic Development saying, we want to do your economic development plan, they would go, what is your credibility to do that? And so I just, you know, just being open to, and these were interests of the academics, right? But we had to get them to think differently about how they did their work.
Thank you. Thank you. So now we are actually at time. You know, the moderator is being moderated because they know if it was up to me, I'm like, oh, come on, guys, just one more, right? Nicole? No? Okay. So we have to respect our presenters' times, but we don't have to stop the conversation here. If our panelists are okay with it, we'd love to continue the conversation via our Facebook group, the Management Faculty of Color Association Facebook group, so that anyone who may have had a question and wasn't able to present it or didn't have their questions answered, they can continue the conversation with you all. And we will also make sure that we share the links that you send to us to make sure everyone who is registered, as well as our body, has access to those links about the day in the life of a professor and the day in the life of a student. So I just want to see those hands raised again, because we know that you all are busy people, and we are so appreciative that you are willing to invest back in us so that we can just be better for the next generation of scholars, leaders, and business owners.
Well, Carlos, and I want to let you know, and I sent this to one person, if anybody wishes to contact me directly, feel free to give them my email. I think it's important that we reach back and continue to engage and support one another in what it is we're doing. You know, Kim Ellis asked a question institutionally, and I don't have the answer institutionally, even though I do like the ideal of demanding that service be counted towards the tenure packet. But I will tell you that one of the things that we all can do is be supportive of one another in whatever role we have. That will make a difference in the world. So anybody who wants to contact me directly, do not hesitate. I'm there for you.
Definitely. The expectation is that you would contact me. If you're not, what's the problem? Like what? I'm not good? I'm not helpful? Like, I don't understand. So,
well, and I think that's a skill set. Yeah, that's a skill set too, right? You need to learn to be proactive, right? Yeah. So in terms of if you're a doctoral student, if I were you, I'd be reaching back to my advisors, I'd be reaching back to my faculty, I'd make sure to have proactively scheduled Zoom meetings. I want to stay on track to finish. That's your goal. That's your career to manage. Use your voice, as Miles said.
Yeah, and just more broadly, I mean, one of the things that we started this whole process with Management Faculty of Color was the culture, right? And the culture is one that we will all collectively be successful. So the expectation has been set because you're part of this, that's what we're supposed to be doing. And if people don't do that, you're violating the expectation that we've been trying to carry on for a long period of time.
I'm gonna write that one down. You've been giving me a lot of sticky note wisdoms tonight, okay? We will all collectively be successful. That's
the goal. Why would I want, I mean,
absolutely.
I'm not in the business of being lonely, and I need smart friends. So it's just not, that's how it works.
Oh, I do want to drop one more sticky note wisdom. Tell us the one that you said, Dr. Williamson, because I asked about your setting behind us. It looks sunny back there.
It's actually a horrible day in Wellington right now. It's nothing but driving rain with nothing but miserable cold. I said, well, sometimes if you're not where you want to be, you just got to believe you're someplace else. So I made up a different background because it gave me a better mood. Why not be encouraged?
All right. So y'all go out there, be great, get some rest, engage in radical self-care, use your voice, get ahead of the digital transformation of education. What else? Be entrepreneurial. What else? Know where your dollar's at. How you making a contribution? What's the economic impact? I'm trying to think. What else?
Support each other. Support each other.
Each other.
Yeah.
Support each other. If you'd like to learn more about how important it is to support each other, you can go read my research on the crabs in a barrel syndrome. just kidding. Shameless
It's
plug.
okay. Self-promotion is cool. It's all good.
Put that on the list.
All
Put that
right,
on
so
the
with
list.
that,
Now, all of y'all be getting off and going to see the Santa Girl, is it?
Yeah,
On
everybody.
Netflix.
We're gonna make Miles rich. Everybody watch Netflix. Even if you don't watch it, just turn it on and walk away.
please send me the name of that Indonesian film you're in.
I'll send that to you. Good luck trying to find that one. It's not on Netflix.
All right, good night, everyone, or good morning.
Bye. Thanks again.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.